I'm David Couch. I'm Auddy's Chief Revenue Officer, which means I'm responsible for generating all the advertising revenue, while at the same time also building up the supply of podcast inventory. I also sit on a development fund of money where we work in partnership with other people to produce new and original podcasts. Creatively, I wouldn't say podcast ads are any better than any other medium. A great ad is a great ad regardless of where it is. But where podcasting is streaks ahead of all other media is in how it's consumed and in the response that it generates. We live in this world where there is just information coming at us from all directions, while at the same time our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. And yet, along comes a podcast, on go the headphones, away go the distractions of the world, and people give us their undivided attention for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and that is totally different to how we consume any other media. So generally, podcasting carries a much lower ad load. I mean, when you think about an hour of radio or an hour of television, you're going to get what, 15, 20 ads? And you're going to be one of 5 ads in an ad break with 5 other ads in it. Now, podcast advertising, when it's done really well, there might be anywhere from 2 to 4 messages within a podcast, and at least 2 of those are going to be personal endorsements coming from the host, which is so different to any other medium. So there are 2 types of adverts. There's a spot ad and a host read. Now, a spot ad is like a radio ad. It's a scripted, pre-recorded audio ad, but if done well, it should be scripted and recorded in a way that really suits the podcast environment. The real powerhouse of podcasting is the host read. And that is where you have given the host the key talking points, you've told them the things you really need them to say, but then they deliver that message in their own style, in their own tone of voice to suit their podcast. And that's what we call a host read. The benefit of a host read is the emotional connection that you as a listener already have with the show and the host. So therefore, it really aligns beautifully with the show that you enjoy listening to. And then the other part of that is the placement. So there are 3 placements. Pre-roll. Pre comes before the podcast starts. And generally as a host read, it would be the advert that leads into the start of the show. A mid-roll, slightly misleading, doesn't have to be in the middle. Actually, mid means anywhere within the content. So actually when a show has 2 mid-rolls, often it comes about 1/3 of the way through and 2/3 of the way through. And then the final part of that is what's called an end roll, which logically comes at the end of the show. A really good example that I'll highlight at the moment is Joss Stone and her podcast, A Cup of Happy. So the theme for A Cup of Happy is all about what is happiness, where do we find happiness, what is the concept of happiness. And she's really, really good at taking whatever is the sponsorship message and finding a strong way to directly link it to what we're talking about. Because when you are advertising in a podcast, you're either buying that podcast because of the context of the show or because of the audience it reaches, or maybe the 2. And so in a particular example recently, I heard a sponsorship message for LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Now that's work and jobs and job changing. And in Joss's case, she takes this message, she identifies that we spend more of our time working than being at home. There's a direct link between your happiness with your job satisfaction and with how you feel about life. So she's able to take what is effectively a business message, relate it to you personally, contextually fit it in perfectly with her podcast, and deliver the key messages that the advertiser wants. And to me, that's a perfect example of getting right message, right host, right audience, delivered in the right way. And what's really important to remember with podcast advertising, again, unlike every other medium, is that you don't actually have final say over how the advert will sound. You will provide some talking points, you will brief the show on the key mandatory things that you really want them to get across, but then actually what you are buying into is the style of that host and the relationship that they have with the audience. So they will take your advertising message and they will deliver it in their own style, in a way that suits their audience, because when that happens, that's when advertising and podcasting is the most effective. Although podcasting is for everyone, actually, the hard to reach younger generation is the real jewel of the podcasting crown. Because this is a generation where ad avoidance is almost a right for them. They want to skip, they want to avoid, they want to ad block. And then along comes a podcast with someone that's cool, and you love the content, and you love the host, and in the midst of all this ad avoidance and ad blocking, on go the headphones, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, full attention. Podcast advertising is not a scale game. You don't go to podcasts for mass media, huge reach. Podcasting is built on these communities. People who have 2,000 listeners, 4,000 listeners, 10,000 listeners, 15,000 listeners, and have that real passionate connection to that podcast. So although you might drive a big response from within the show, the size of the base that you're driving a response from might be quite small, which is why when you were thinking about planning a podcast campaign, it's not about, I'm just going to do podcasting. It's about, I'm going to go out and find all of these range of podcasts of various sizes that are really going to help me deliver on driving the response that I want. Like all good advertising, it starts with you in the beginning understanding, who are you trying to reach and what do you want those people to do? And once you know that, then what you do is you find a couple of good podcast networks, like ourselves, and you brief them on that fact. And then those podcast networks will have a direct relationship with the hosts and will really understand the shows, will really understand the audiences, will really understand previous campaigns, what's worked well, what's not worked well, how have those audiences responded to different particular campaigns or messages. Then they can come back to you with a solution, with a range of options about who you could consider working with and what you have to do.